All right, so this is the runner discovery experience. So basically, uh, the idea here is to explore a little bit how a user of GitLab discovers the runner experience or like the runner concept itself when they are navigating a project within GitLab or when they are setting up a project within GitLab. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna set up a new project. this is gonna this is gonna load the new project setup screen, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a quick tester 2 because I already have another one, and I'm gonna not initialize this with a readme. I'm just gonna create it. All right, so here's one interesting thing. Like, this is already created. There's all this setup, which for someone who is a developer, this is a basically like a very easy onboarding experience for their Git experience. However, at this point, you start realizing that there's not a lot of things going on when it comes to like onboarding the user into the CI experience, right? So although the CI it's kind of like baked in into the experience of your whole GitLab end-to-end uh, experience, you are not really seeing it here. Besides setting up first the repo, so that's kind of interestingly. We're gonna create a file quickly. So I'm gonna create. This is a file, and then I'm just gonna call this txt, and then I'm gonna commit the changes. All right, so now this has been successfully created. If I go back to my repo, if I go back to my project details, now I have other stuff to look at. So here's a couple of interesting things. There's the enable auto DevOps, the adding the Kubernetes cluster, and there's the setup CI/CD. So because I'm kind of like doing this from the perspective of a user who is onboarding, who's kind of like getting set up with GitLab, I'm gonna do what I think is naturally like the first intention, which is like setting up the CI/CD. So when you do that, this happens. So this is kind of interesting because like it's taking you to the file composer with a GitLab CI YAML template applied. But what's interesting is there's no context right now of what's going on. It's basically we're telling the users like, here's your GitLab -CI YAML file, but like there's really no context of what you are supposed to create. However, if you apply the template, if you open to apply the template, then you'll see that there's like several options to do this. So let's say I'm doing a Hexo project. Hexo is a static HTML builder. So if I do that, then like this shows up. Like this is already a little bit better in terms of introducing the concept. So it says that this file is a template, that it might need some editing. It gives you like some kind of like address to visit and learn about what's Hexo. But that's pretty much it. It's like you see the instructions, and like if you're kind of like familiar with YAML, you already know like a little bit of what's going on. If you're moving from another build agent, like Jenkins, for instance, or Circle CI, you might also know a little bit of what's going on. But like definitely, this could be better. This is like this is a moment of the experience where you are really not entirely sure what's going on, right? Like it's there's like some things being set up for you, but you're definitely not fully onboarded into what's the GitLab dash CI YAML file. And of course, you're not like at this point, you're not necessarily familiar with the concept of CI within GitLab. So that's interesting because until this point, like the GitLab CI YAML file is very relevant to the runner concept, but until this point, we haven't been exposed to the runner concept yet. So actually, the interesting thing is that, like from a user perspective, if you want to set up something in your CI/CD, I think it's kind of like you start like gravitating to things that say CI/CD, like they are kind of like listed with the CI/CD string somewhere. So in this particular case, on the sidebar, you will see that there's top level hierarchy object, which is called CI/CD, and it has pipelines, jobs, schedules, charts. So I might, as a user, kind of like gravitate to that and like start clicking a little bit there, around there. So I'm gonna leave these. And this is actually a little bit better in terms of getting onboarded into that CI/CD experience. I'm not gonna start with a pipeline yet. Let's assume that I'm just kind of like I just want to run some jobs, right? So if I go to jobs, I'm gonna click these. It says that there are no jobs to show. So like it's kind of interesting because now I'm kind of like starting to understand that there's a relationship between setting up the pipeline and like the jobs that run within the pipeline. So basically, this is telling me you need a pipeline to run a job. Again, until this point, there's no indication of the runner concept yet. If you click quick start, this actually takes you to documentation where you can start getting a little bit of context of what's the runner. So if we do find here, you're gonna see that the runner concept is mentioned several times, and it's kind of like explained briefly. One interesting thing is that they are telling you here, so in brief, the steps needed to have a working CI can be summed up to adding a GitLab CI YAML to the root directory of your repository and configuring the runner, right? So the interesting here is that like they're kind of like telling you, oh yeah, go and work with the runner, but the runner concept is still not like fully disclosed. So that's kind of interesting because at this point, like I already know, like okay, there's something that's called the runner. Maybe I want to set up these. Maybe I want to do something with these. So where do I find that, right? So the discoverability until this point is not great in that aspect. So I'm gonna go back to the details, and I already tried these. This took me to the template of the GitLab CI YAML file. There's this thing called enable auto DevOps, which as a user I might gravitate towards that as well. And there's also the Kubernetes cluster, which I also may gravitate towards that because there's already kind of like an assumption that if you want to run isolated tests, like you might need to bring like your own Kubernetes cluster or your own container to run these things. So at this point, there's already kind of like a little bit of like bridging between the concept of the CI and like the things that you need to set up to run your CI, and like these two things definitely like grab the attention in terms of setting up that experience. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna add a Kubernetes cluster because I want to explore what's going on there, right? And that's interesting. This takes me to adding a Kubernetes cluster. There's a lot of context of why this is needed. Like it tells you that you can use to review apps, deploy your applications, run your pipelines. Okay, there's a little bit of things going on there that like give me an idea that this is necessary to actually do CI within GitLab, but still it's not fully telling me anything about like the runner concept. So the runner concept until this point it's a little bit hidden. We're gonna try one last thing here, which is enabling auto DevOps, right? So if I do this, interestingly, this takes me to the settings of the CI/CD. So until this point, this is kind of like the first time that you discover there are some concepts, or like there are some particularly scope things within the settings here, right? And one of those things is CI/CD. So like from a discoverability point of view, it's kind of hard to tell that that exists there. But let's say that because of this auto DevOps path that I took, now I know about this, and now I can start exploring a little bit of these settings, and then the runners concept shows up once again here. So that's interesting because at this point, like I'm seeing it, but still very vague, right? Like there's register and see your runners for this project. I guess that's kind of like interesting because on the documentation we saw that setting up the runner was kind of like part of setting up that CI experience. But yeah, not a lot of context, not as much as if you do like this, right? You actually have on that particular thing that I clicked for variables, you have like documentation linking to that. So right away you can see that that's basically like low hanging fruit. Like we could add more explanation of what's going on there for runners. I'm gonna expand it, and when I expand it, there's more context to see, right? Like there's a little bit of an explanation now, like one that it's actually gonna like explain a little bit of what the runner is. So it's gonna say that the runner is a process which runs a job. You can set up as many runners as you need. Runners can be placed on separate users, servers, and even on your local machine. So a lot of interesting things there, and there's like the concept of the active and pause runners, right? So you go down here, and it's also very vague at this point. Like it starts getting kind of like circling back to that Kubernetes concept that I was trying to explore before. So you see it here. It's telling you that you can install a runner on a Kubernetes cluster. So basically, they're telling you, oh, you can use cubes to basically use runner, but again, it's not very clear what runner is doing or what's gonna do for you in terms or like from the perspective of the CI. And then there's like more specific things like registering like runners manually. There's the concept of the share runners which like basically for a person who has used the free tier of GitLab.com, the host version, they're probably already gonna have a little bit of an understanding of what's going on, because like basically if you're doing CI on a free project, it's running on the shared runners, and at this point you're gonna see that there's like 8 shared runners. But again, it's kind of big concepts going on here. One thing that I will like grabs my attention is this ID, and then this other ID. So there are 2 IDs, 2 identifiers, not very clear what they're doing or what they're supposed to be signifying or indicated in terms of the experience that GitLab provides for the CI and the things that I need to set up. The URL is kind of pretty straightforward because at this point, like you understand that you're like basically this is like the location of that runner, and it's homologous to the fact that you could also have runners coming from other locations, right? Like from your local machine, from a kubes cluster. So like there's some interesting things there as well. But yeah, like that's perhaps more clear, but the IDs are not that clear. And then the other thing that it's not really clear is the tags. So the tags, you can infer some things from the tags, like you know that this is like using Docker, like this is using GCE. So like and you can also see some things like East C, so like that's running in a particular zone. You like if you are using AWS or Google Cloud, like this kind of like nomenclature already tells you a little bit of like, oh, that's running in certain availability zone or region. But again, like there's things that are not necessarily very straightforward, like what's Git annex. If I'm not pretty good with Git yet, or like I'm not an expert on Git, I might not understand what's going on with that particular Git annex stack. So like from a very high level perspective, these things are kind of easy to infer, but like it's not necessarily clear what's going on with these things. You know, like it's like as a first time user, I will be curious if what the Ruby tag is telling me is that if my project has Ruby, it's only gonna run on this shared runner, right? Like that would be one possibility. But another possibility is that I don't know. This is a runner that it's I don't know. This is a runner that has like more capabilities than other runners, right? There's this GitLab uh, -org runner. Like that's an interesting one because it makes you think like, okay, there's something maybe with the whole with the self-managed version of the GitLab implementation that is kind of like related to this runner, right? Like, so a lot of vague kind of like on the air concepts. Which is interesting. And then there's this concept of group runners, which kind of hidden on the bottom. And it tells you GitLab group runners can execute code for all the projects in this group. They can be managed using the runners API. So that's interesting because like there's another concept that is showing up here, which is the runners API. Probably what I will do at this point as a user is just search for runner and GitLab, and then it's gonna show the documents, and then it's probably gonna be the best place for me to get exposed to the runner concept. So I'm actually gonna find a lot of extra details here, right? But it still doesn't feel like a very streamlined process. There was a mention to the GitLab runner API. I don't know if that's necessarily on that documentation. So like if you go here, you actually find that there's documentation for the runners API. So a little bit of a disconnect there in terms of documentation and how you find things. So yeah, the experience so far is not necessarily the best in terms of discovery, and I think there's many things that could be done to improve this experience. Yeah, I look forward to working on those things and hopefully start improving some of these flows very soon. Thanks for watching.